I married a woman whose voice could talk a cat down from a tree. On the air, she was Mara from Mornings. All soft sunshine and no drama, just vibes. Easing folks in our town from snooze button to school drop-off with the same gentle hand my mother used to fold bedsheets. Off the air, she was still Mara, only quieter, the way you feel when the station lights go dim and the red on-air sign stops glowing. Same room, different temperature. Our life fit neatly into that rhythm. She'd wrangle callers and sponsor reads. I'd keep our old ranch house humming. Leaky faucet, lawn with more ambition than I had time for, pantry that never stayed organized. We were small-town steady. Simple. Or so I thought. The first odd thing was coffee. Mara's a loyal creature. French press on Sundays. Medium roast drip Monday through Friday. Splash of half and half. 2 sugars. Always in the blue mug with the chip that looks like Idaho. Then the station hires a new sports guy for the morning block. Someone corporate sent from a bigger market to modernize our brand. His name was Chase, of course it was, and he talked like he was always winding up to spike a football. First morning, I dropped Mara off. Her car was in the shop for brakes. And there he is in the lobby in a hoodie with our rival high school's bulldogs stretched across the chest like a dare. He's got a to-go cup with a long order sharpet on it, like a paragraph. Nitro cold brew. Oat milk. 2 pumps of something I can't pronounce. Cinnamon dust. I held the door, and he breezed past with a big dog energy, my man, that hung in the air like cologne. Mara squeezed my hand and said, "Play nice," and I said, "I am," which was half true. 2 weeks later, my wife, my black coffee wife, comes home with a cardboard tray carrying 4 cups that smell like a bakery fell into a wood chipper. "Station run," she says, and sets one in front of me. The cup has a sleeve with the rival bulldog on it. I pick it up, read the order, and it's that same paragraph. Nitro something with flakes on top. "Thought I'd try new fuel," she says lightly, as if this was a regular Tuesday and not the start of a different planet. I sip. It tastes like dessert trying out for the Olympics. She watches me too closely for someone who's just branching out. Then came the catchphrases. On the show, Mara's trademark line is that no drama, just vibes. She made t-shirts once, in pastel, sold them at the county fair. But suddenly she's dropping, "Let's cook," and "Lock it in," little borrowed thunderbolts that happen to be what Chase yells every time he's right about a point spread. I listen in the truck as I drive to the hardware store, and I hear her say, "Not gonna lie, that's elite." And it's like hearing your grandmother use slang you only see online. It doesn't fit, but she keeps trying it on, like a sweater with the tags still hanging. The phones light up. The teenagers like it. The owner likes the teenagers liking it. I chew on the inside of my cheek and keep driving. The bumper sticker appeared on a Thursday. I was loading groceries when I saw it gleaming on the back window, the rival bulldog again. We've never had a sticker on any of our cars. Mara says stickers look like a rash, and that town smells like a locker room. Now here's this thing shamelessly wagging at the neighbors. I carry the milk inside and don't mention it. I watch her look at the car through the kitchen window, waiting. She doesn't say anything, either. We dance around it like a hot skillet. Suspicion is a slow kind of weather. It starts like humidity, annoying, weightless, and then by noon you can't pretend it's not a storm. I didn't let myself use the word affair. Not for Mara, not for me. We were predictable in the most comforting way. But the station started to feel like a place I couldn't see clearly anymore. She stayed late under the umbrella of show prep, came home with different radio stories, little in-jokes from segments that weren't funny to me. Once she tried one out. "You had to be there," she said, smiling, and I thought, yes, that's exactly the problem. The station itself looks like an appliance showroom from the late 90s. Tan carpet, buzzing fluorescent lights, a break room microwave that could probably warm a Buick. I know it well. I helped Mara refinish the little desk where the interns sort mail. I've painted that lobby twice. I've sat on the sagging couch by the front window waiting for her to wrap a post-show meeting. It's our second home. So when she said, "We're evolving the brand," I shrugged and said, "Okay," because I've got no business telling a radio station how to evolve. But I do know my wife's footsteps. I know the way her face sets when she's telling the truth, and the way it softens when she's making a story more palatable. There's a new softness now, applied like gloss. Chase, for his part, is everywhere. He records quick-hit videos from the hallway, pops into Mara's booth in segments that don't need him, laughs a little too loud at things that weren't jokes. He's the guy who high-fives you even when your hands are full. The listeners are split down the middle. Moms who think he's a hoot. Dads who mutter about respecting the game. The owner, who cares mainly about the numbers, starts smiling with her eyes when she passes him in the hall. Mara says he's good for the energy. I say he's a lot. She says, it's radio. Like that explains every last thing people do. The day I knew my weather had changed for good was a plain old Monday. I pulled up the stream on my phone while sanding a cabinet door in the garage. They were taking calls for their Hometown Hype segment where folks brag on good news. A woman named Patty gets on and drops a line so odd. Tell coach we found the ketchup packets, that I pause my sanding. The studio laughs like it's the funniest sentence you could stitch together. Mara laughs hardest. Oh my gosh, Patty, that's elite, she says, and I can't hear the grin through the speakers. It isn't just that she gets the joke. It's that she anticipates it, finishes it, belongs to it. I'm 2 miles away with sawdust on my shirt, and I've never felt so far from my own wife. I set the sander down and listen to the rest with my arms crossed, a stupid posture that makes you feel more in control than you are. She tosses back and forth with Chase like a practiced doubles team. It's good radio. I can admit that. It's the kind of chemistry you can't teach. The kind you also can't stand if you're the one left out of the practice. That night, the coffee order changed again. She poured the new concoction into the blue-chipped mug, Idaho looking up at me like it saw something coming. You like it? She asked. I said it was growing on me. What I didn't say was that something else was, too. A shape I recognized from every small-town gossip story in every grocery aisle. My wife's voice is gentle as a morning, but that evening it stuck to me like a song I didn't pick. I went to bed with the radio on low in my head, hearing her say, no drama, just vibes, and wondering which part I'd stopped providing. The thing about a small-town morning show is that you start to know the rhythms, not just of the station, but of the people who make it. My wife, Claire, had been producing Sunrise and Shine for 8 years, and she'd built this whole no drama, just vibes image. On air, she was the unshakable voice in the background, the one who could calmly cut from a traffic accident to a story about Mrs. Kincaid's cat finally coming down from the oak tree. But at home, I noticed the static creeping in before I could name it. It started small. She stopped making our coffee the way she always had, 2 sugars, splash of cream, and began ordering this elaborate thing. Oat milk latte, cinnamon, double shot. I only noticed because that's exactly what the new sports guy, Tyler, chugged every morning like he was in a perpetual state of late for practice. Then came the phrases. Claire had always been more NPR than ESPN, but suddenly she was tossing out Tyler's little catchphrases during the show. That's a home run in my book. Time to throw a Hail Mary. She said them in that effortless, breezy way that made listeners smile. But at the breakfast table, I could hear the echo of someone else's voice behind hers. One Thursday, I came out to the driveway, and there it was, a bright yellow sticker slapped onto our back bumper. Rival high school mascot. Claire has never been a sticker person. She says they make a car look like it's in its teenage rebellion phase. And that's cool. She's mocked them for years, mostly because they once knocked our hometown team out of state playoffs in a particularly ugly game. I scraped at the edges of that sticker with my thumbnail before work, but it was stuck on good. Just like the doubt that was starting to set in. It all really clicked the day of the inside joke. They'd wrapped up a light segment about local businesses, and a caller, Marty from the bait shop, said something weird about bringing the maple syrup next time. It wasn't in reference to anything they'd been talking about. But Claire laughed, too much, too knowingly. It was the laugh she gave when someone nailed a private punchline. 2 days later, I caught her skipping over a ballad that had been a morning show staple for years. Tyler had once called it a funeral dirge for people who owned too many cats. On air, she chuckled, said it wasn't the vibe today, and flipped to a sports montage instead. By then, I'd started poking through the run sheets she left on the kitchen counter. They were supposed to be practical, song schedules, ad breaks, community bulletin reminders, but one morning I found something odd in the traffic update section. Instead of notes about the highway or construction, there was a little doodle of a coffee cup and the words, Mile 47, long stop. Now, I've driven Mile 47. There's nothing there except a roadside motel and a diner that's famous for its banana cream pie. It was all lining up like a radio segment you could predict from the jingle alone. So I started writing my own. When the station opened the lines for Local Sponsor Appreciation Week, I called in, claimed I was representing a fictional business, Main Street Auto and Adventure, and read an ad copy I'd prepared. Every line rhymed with Tyler's pet phrases. Score a home run on savings. Throw a Hail Mary on your mileage. And then, casually, I suggested folks take a scenic drive up past mile 47, stop in for pie, or a little rest at the cozy roadside inn. Claire didn't flinch on air, but I could hear the pause in her breathing before she cut to commercial. That afternoon, I walked into the station, not as her husband, but as a man with paperwork. Contract paperwork. It stated that due to breach of professional standards, the producer and sports anchor positions would be restructured immediately. The twist? The station owner was my Aunt June. Retired, but still holding the controlling shares. She'd been quietly testing who in the staff had the backbone to run the place next. I handed her the signed sponsor agreement that, with my donation, bumped ratings for the month and freed her to clean house without tanking ad revenue. Looks like you just passed the test, Aunt June said, sliding a new folder across the desk. On the front, Honest Husband, weekly segment proposal. The next week, Claire and Tyler were out. I was in, reading ad copy that somehow, coincidentally, always ended with the same mile markers they used to disappear to, while the checks for their final paydays came with my signature at the bottom. When Aunt June slid that folder across the desk, I thought she was joking. A weekly segment? Me? I've never been in front of a microphone unless you count ordering pancakes at the VFW breakfast. But she leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers like she was about to offer me either a job or a plea deal. You've got timing, she said. And you've got an ear for a story. That's half of radio. The other half, I quickly learned, was showing up early enough to make the coffee before anyone else could mess it up. The following Monday, Honest Husband made its debut. I sat in the same booth Claire used to sit in, headphones squeezing my ears like they were reminding me to behave. I opened with a story about how my neighbor's lawn flamingo collection mysteriously migrated into my yard, and how the only way I could prove they weren't mine was by showing the cops the picture of me scowling at them from last summer's block party. Folks liked it. The phone lit up with calls from people wanting to tell me about their own flamingo moments, the kind of oddball little truths you couldn't make up if you tried. It felt good. Not vindictive, not gloating, just honest. Of course, in a small town, honest gets around faster than gossip, but gossip dresses itself up and comes along for the ride. By the second week, I could feel eyes on me in the grocery store. Some folks gave me the good-for-you nod. Others had that polite pity face, the one they usually save for people whose cars have been hit by deer. Claire wasn't invisible, either. She'd taken a leave from the station, which in practice meant she was working at the coffee shop on Main, the same one she used to breeze into for her special drinks. I stopped in once for a regular black coffee, partly to see her, partly to remind myself why I wasn't losing any sleep over her absence. She was behind the counter, hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger but also tired. She didn't flinch when she saw me. "Morning, Dave," she said, neutral as the weather. "Morning," I said back. "Can I get a medium drip?" "Sure." She poured it without asking about cream or sugar. She knew I took it black now. Maybe she'd been listening to the show. I didn't linger. But as I walked out, I caught her reflection in the window, watching me cross the street. By week 3, Honest Husband had a sponsor. Ironically, the same auto shop whose owner used to call into the morning show just to flirt with Claire. He shook my hand and said, "About time someone told it straight on this station." His ad money paid for a new mic in the booth and a little on-air sting they played before my segment. A cheerful guitar strum and the words, "Let's get honest." It was around then that I started hearing from people who claimed to know the real story about Claire and Tyler. One caller, anonymous, of course, said they'd seen the two of them at the Mile 47 diner more than once, and not just for pie. Another told me Tyler had been bragging at the gym about his producer long before Claire's coffee order changed. I didn't put any of that on air. The show wasn't about dragging her through the mud. It was about telling the truth in a way people could see themselves in. Still, it was hard not to weave in little nods. I did a whole segment on things you notice when someone changes their order, framing it as a lighthearted take on how people's habits can shift in ways that tell a bigger story. The phones lit up. One woman said her husband started eating salads the week he joined a cycling group, and she didn't find out until later that the group had one member, named Crystal. Aunt June liked those kinds of parallels. She had a knack for knowing how much to give the audience without making it a tabloid. Tease them with truth, she told me. They'll fill in the rest themselves. But Claire wasn't just sitting quietly in the background. I started hearing from mutual friends that she'd been telling people I'd made up half of it for ratings. That I was spinning the whole thing like one of his fishing stories. Tyler, apparently, was telling anyone who'd listened that I was obsessed with him. It all came to a head at the fall festival. I was judging the chili cook-off, another perk of being the town's newest personality, when Claire walked up to my table. She had on that easy smile she used to wear at the station, but her eyes were set like she'd been rehearsing. "Congrats on the show," she said. "Heard you're a hit." "Thanks," I said. "Heard you've been keeping busy too." She tilted her head, just enough to make it seem playful. "Maybe one day you'll tell the whole story." "Maybe I already have," I said, ladling out a sample of someone's venison chili. We didn't say much else. But that night, I got home to find an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a run sheet from the old show, one I hadn't seen before. In the traffic update section, in Claire's handwriting, were the words, "Mile 47, bring syrup." It didn't sting the way I thought it would. If anything, it confirmed I'd been playing in the right key all along. The truth has a sound to it, even when you hear it secondhand. By the next honest husband, I knew exactly how I'd start. Sometimes, I told the mic, you find out the traffic jam you thought was just a slowdown is actually a detour. And if you're lucky, that detour takes you somewhere worth stopping. The phone lines lit up before I even hit the punchline. You'd think calling into a live morning show and blowing the lid off your wife's affair would be the end of it. Neat little bow on a messy story. But in small towns, endings aren't endings. They're just the point where people get creative about keeping the gossip fresh. The morning after my little sponsor stunt, I couldn't walk into the gas station without someone giving me that look. You know the one. Half pity, half, "I was listening when you did that," and it was glorious. Even old Mr. Reynolds, who hasn't cracked a smile since 1979, gave me a nod at the pump. That's basically a standing ovation in his language. At the station, though, it was like a bomb had gone off. My aunt, bless her, called me into her office and handed me a fresh set of headphones. "Your first official Honest Husband segment is Friday," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You'll have 15 minutes, live, no script." I asked what she wanted me to talk about. "Whatever you'd say to a buddy over a beer," she grinned. "Just make sure it's FCC safe. The rest is yours." Meanwhile, my wife and the sports guy, Travis, were nowhere to be seen. Word was, they'd been temporarily suspended pending review of professional conduct, which is corporate speak for, "We'd fire you now," but the legal department hasn't finished sharpening its knives. Still, their fingerprints were all over the place. The breakroom fridge still had his gallon jug of energy drink wedged between the milk cartons, and my wife's "Don't touch" producer fuel sticky note was still slapped across her coffee creamer. Every time I walked past her old desk, I half expected to see her pop up with that fake on-air smile, like this had all been a weird dream. The first Honest Husband went better than I'd hoped. I told the story about how I once bought a used lawnmower that died halfway through its first mow, and how that was still a better investment than my marriage. The phones lit up. Folks weren't just laughing, they were sharing their own, "wish I'd seen the signs" stories. It felt less like a radio segment and more like group therapy with better music breaks. But here's the thing about Travis. He wasn't the kind of guy to slink away quietly. A week later, I'm driving home and I see a brand new bumper sticker on a rusty Ford parked outside the diner. "Go Cougars." Same rival high school my wife's mystery sticker came from. I peek inside and there's Travis, slouched in a booth, talking low to someone with their back to me. Blonde hair, big sunglasses. Didn't take a detective to guess. I could have walked in, caused a scene. But that's not my style. Instead, I made a mental note and went home to brainstorm my next segment. That Friday, I opened the show with, "You know, folks, there's a lot of talk about team loyalty in sports. But sometimes, people switch teams for questionable reasons. And sometimes, they find out the new team doesn't have a coach. It's just chaos and matching t-shirts." The phone lines were a riot. People knew. They always know. That's the thing about a small-town station. You can talk in parables, and the right people still get the message. 2 weeks into my new gig, my aunt drops another twist on me. She's moving into semi-retirement. You keep this up, she says, and you could be running the whole morning block by summer. I didn't know whether to laugh or ask if she was serious. She was. Completely. And my wife? She finally texted me. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just, you really don't have to make this personal on the air. I stared at it for a good minute before replying. It's not personal. It's public. You made sure of that. I left it at that. No block, no fight. Just enough rope. Now, every time I sit in that chair and see the on-air light flicker on, I think about how I got here, not by chasing drama, but by telling the truth. And in a town like ours, that's the one thing you can't fake. By the third month of Honest Husband, the novelty had worn off for most of the town, but the loyalty had set in. Folks who used to just tune in for the morning traffic were now timing their coffee breaks to catch my segment. The hardware store guys kept the volume up so customers could accidentally hear it while buying nails. Even the high school civics teacher had started using clips in her class to talk about local media's role in community discourse, which I'm pretty sure was just her way of saying she liked hearing me roast people in polite code. That loyalty didn't mean the target of my jabs had gone quiet, though. Travis was back on social media like a moth to porch light, posting grainy selfies at local events and tagging the station as if he still worked there. In one, he's holding up a foam finger at the rival high school's basketball game, grinning like a man who doesn't realize the scoreboard behind him is showing his team losing by 20 points. My wife's hand is visible on the edge of the frame, just enough to recognize the chipped nail polish she used to chew off during commercial breaks. One Friday morning, just before my segment, I find an anonymous envelope slipped under the station door. Inside, a printout of a Facebook comment thread. It's Travis mouthing off in the local community happenings group about how some washed-up husband can't get over being dumped. The replies are a buffet of sarcasm. My personal favorite. At least he's not crying into a rival team's foam finger. I don't usually take the bait, but this one I could work with. That day, I told a sports metaphor story. I talked about how sometimes in a game, a player fumbles the ball, and instead of trying to recover it, he starts yelling about how the ball was unfair and biased against him. How the crowd gets quiet, then starts booing, not because he fumbled, but because he forgot the first rule. You don't blame the ball when you dropped it. The phone lines blew up. Someone even sent in an air horn sound effect, which our sound tech gleefully played under every call. The next week, my aunt calls me into her office. She's holding 2 sheets of paper. One is a contract for me to officially take over the full morning slot. The other is a complaint letter from a concerned citizen about the slanderous tone of recent programming. She hands me the contract first. Sign this before I file that, she says deadpan. I sign. She grins. Good. Now, want to hear the best part? The complaint is from Travis. He CC'd the FCC, which means someone over there is going to have to listen to every single one of your shows to see if he has a case. Which means they're going to hear everything he doesn't want them to hear. I finish. Meanwhile, my wife tries her first real countermove. She posts a photo of herself in the station booth with the caption, "Once a producer, always a producer. Big things coming soon." It gets about 12 likes, most from her cousins. The next day, she's spotted at the diner with a guy who's definitely not Travis, bald, older, wearing a real estate polo. My phone buzzes with 3 different texts from people giving me the play-by-play, like I'm running an intelligence operation. By then, the dynamic had shifted. They weren't the power duo anymore. They were just 2 names people remembered with a smirk. The new sports anchor, Nate, a local kid fresh out of broadcasting school, was the exact opposite of Travis. Polite. Listened more than he talked. His idea of a catchphrase was, "That's a good point, Dave." We clicked immediately, which is why, one morning in March, I decided to go for the long play. The segment was about routes worth taking, framed as a piece on scenic drives for spring. But the route I described started at the station, took the old county road past the rival high school, curved through downtown, then, innocently, passed by the diner and motel at mile 47. I didn't name them, of course, just gave the mile markers and mentioned great pie and plenty of parking for long stays. The station's text line lit up with laughing emojis. 10 minutes later, I got a single-line email from my aunt. That was mean. Do it again next week. And here's the kicker. That same afternoon, the The diner posted a thank you on their Facebook page for the nice mention on local radio this morning. Business was up. People were coming in asking for the pie I'd talked about, and the owner said she might just name it after me. Travis and my wife. They couldn't touch it. Any public protest would mean admitting they knew exactly what I was referencing. And in a small town, that kind of admission is like handing out flyers with your worst secret printed on them. By April, Honest Husband wasn't just a segment, it was the brand. Folks were pitching me story ideas in the grocery aisle. The local print shop started selling mugs with my sign-off line. Stay honest, folks. And my aunt was already floating the idea of syndication to a couple of neighboring town stations. The sweetest moment, though, came quietly. I was walking to my truck after a late broadcast when a listener I barely knew stopped me. Middle-aged guy, worn Carhartt jacket, looked like he'd been carrying a lot around. "You know," he said, "you saved me from making a real dumb decision. Was gonna go back to my ex, heard your show, figured I'd think twice. Best decision I ever made." He nodded once and walked off, leaving me standing there with my keys in my hand, feeling something I hadn't in a while, like maybe the truth, even dressed up in jokes, could actually do some good. By the time spring rolled into summer, I'd gotten used to the sound of my own voice bouncing back at me from speakers in grocery stores and hardware shops. Honest Husband wasn't just a segment anymore, it was a fixture. The bumper music was as familiar to folks in town as the noon whistle from the firehouse. I'd also gotten used to the quiet. My wife, ex-wife now, had moved out of our ranch house in late April. We didn't have some big blow-up about it. She came by one afternoon with a couple cardboard boxes, asked me if I wanted to keep the chipped Idaho mug, and I said sure. That was about it. No dramatic, we'll always be friends send-off. Just two people who'd already had their final conversation a long time ago, even if we didn't realize it at the time. Travis was harder to avoid. He had the persistence of a housefly and the self-awareness of a brick. Rumor was he'd been trying to get on with a station 2 counties over, but nobody was biting. Small market radio's a tight circle, and the kind of exit he and my ex made tends to travel faster than a resume. Still, he'd pop up at public events, hanging around the edges like a guy waiting for someone to ask him back into the game. June, my aunt, wasn't shy about using him as an example in staff meetings. Rule number 1, she'd tell the interns. An hour in, I spot him, Travis, standing about 20 feet back from the booth, leaning against a lamppost. He's wearing sunglasses even though the street's in shade, and he's got that lazy smirk like he's waiting for me to acknowledge him. Beside him, my ex, in a sundress, holding 2 iced coffees. For a second, it's like nothing's changed, same drinks, same smug look on his face. But then I realize something. The people walking past them aren't stopping to say hi. They're stopping at my booth. They're spinning the prize wheel, laughing, taking selfies with me like I'm the main act. Travis is just background noise. When my next segment starts, I don't look at him directly, but I steer the topic. Funny thing about summer festivals, I say into the mic, you get all kinds of folks coming back into town. Some are here to visit family. Some are here to relive old times. And some are just hoping someone will remember they used to be important. But the thing about a hometown crowd, they remember what you did last time you had the mic. The tech guy, bless him, hits the wah-wah sound effect without me asking. The crowd in front of the booth laughs. Big, open laughs, the kind that carry down the street. I don't need to see Travis's face to know he heard it. After the broadcast, June pulls me aside. "You've got 2 offers," she says. "One's for syndicating Honest Husband to 3 more stations in the region. The other? A local TV spot, 5 minutes a week on the evening news, Honest Minute with Dave." I tell her I'll take both. That night, I'm walking to my truck with the last of the station's gear when I pass the diner. Through the window, I see them, Travis and my ex, sitting in a booth. She's looking down at her phone. He's staring out the window toward Main Street, where the festival's winding down. For the first time, he doesn't look smug. He just looks like a guy who stayed too long at a party where nobody noticed he'd arrived. Back home, I pour coffee into the Idaho mug and sit on the porch. The air's thick with the smell of cut grass and charcoal from someone's barbecue. I think about all the mornings I used to listen to her on the air, that easy laugh of hers filling the kitchen. And I think about the first time I sat in her old booth, headphones on, heart pounding, wondering if I had anything worth saying. Turns out I did. The next Friday, I opened my segment with this. "Folks, I've learned something in the past year. Life's like radio. You can't control what's playing before your turn at the mic. But once that red light comes on, you've got a choice. You can copy someone else's lines, or you can tell your own story. And if you tell it honest, people will stick around to hear the end. The phones light up, not with gossip, not with pity, just people wanting to share their own truths. It's not revenge anymore. It's not even about them anymore. It's about the fact that, somehow, I took the worst chapter of my life and turned it into a show people actually count on. And in a town like ours, that's better than any bumper sticker. Because in the end, the thing that lasts isn't the scandal. It's the signal. And mine's coming through loud and clear. Subscribe to the channel